Lake Wiley boaters say it's been a while since they've seen water levels this low, and it's affecting how they get their boats in and out of the water. Drought management advisors say water levels could get even lower with no rain in the near forecast.
Atlanta is living on borrowed water, not metaphorically, literally. Right now, the reservoir that keeps one of America's largest metropolitan regions alive is shrinking again, exposing the ruins of a world that was never meant to resurface. As the shoreline retreats, entire pieces of forgotten Georgia are clawing their way back into daylight. Drowned highways, abandoned foundations, forests frozen beneath the water since the 1950s, and the remains of a racetrack where engines once screamed before the valley disappeared under millions of gallons of water. Most people think Lake Lanier was built for Atlanta. It wasn't, and that misunderstanding may become one of the most expensive planning failures in modern American history, because nearly 6 million people now depend on a reservoir that was never designed to sustain a megacity. No backup river, no vast underground aquifer, no secondary system capable of carrying the load if the lake fails. Just one increasingly stressed body of water balancing the survival of an exploding urban region against drought, heat, politics, and mathematics that no longer work in Atlanta's favor. The unsettling part is this: officials have known the vulnerability for decades. Back in 1956, when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sealed the gates of Beaufort Dam, the mission was straightforward: flood control, hydroelectric power, navigation. Those were the official purposes approved by Congress. Drinking water for millions of future residents was never part of the plan. But cities grow faster than infrastructure evolves. Atlanta exploded. What had once been a mid-sized southern city transformed into one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the United States. Suburbs spread outward in every direction. Highways multiplied. Corporate headquarters poured in. Neighborhoods replaced forests. And quietly, almost accidentally, the city tied its future to Lake Lanier without ever fully confronting whether the lake could support that future permanently. Today, roughly 70% of Metro Atlanta's drinking water comes from Lake Lanier and the Chattahoochee River system connected to it. That dependence would already be risky under stable climate conditions. The problem is that conditions are no longer stable. Rainfall patterns across the southeast are becoming more erratic. Heat waves are intensifying. Droughts are arriving faster and lasting longer. Scientists now warn that the region is entering an era where extreme swings between flooding and severe water shortages could become the new normal. Atlanta sits directly in the middle of that collision. And unlike cities built beside massive natural water systems, Atlanta has almost no margin for error. The city rests on hard granite terrain that stores very little groundwater. Underground reserves contribute almost nothing to regional demand. What falls from the sky is essentially what the city gets. If rain fails, the system weakens quickly. That reality became terrifyingly clear during the drought of 2007. At first, it looked like another dry southern summer. Then the rain stopped completely. Lake Lanier began dropping at a speed that alarmed engineers and state officials alike. Week after week, the shoreline pulled farther back. Docks sat stranded above exposed mud. Boat ramps closed. The lake fell more than 20 feet below full pull, uncovering eerie remnants of the community's sacrifice when the reservoir was created decades ago. Georgia Highway 53 reappeared in places. The foundations of submerged homes surfaced again. The skeleton of Looper Speedway, buried underwater for generations, emerged from the receding lake bed like a ghost from another century. But the visuals were only part of the crisis. Behind closed doors, water managers were running projections that sounded impossible for a major American city. At Atlanta's existing rate of consumption, experts estimated the region could face catastrophic shortages within months if conditions failed to improve. Not years, months. Emergency reserves at the time could sustain the city for only a matter of days. The panic reached such a level that Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue publicly gathered citizens on the steps of the Capitol to pray for rain. Critics mocked the image later, but inside state agencies, the fear was genuine. There were no easy engineering solutions left. Conservation orders spread across northern Georgia. Outdoor watering bans took effect. Restaurants stopped serving water automatically. Residents were urged to shorten showers and reduce daily usage however possible. For the first time, millions of Atlantans were forced to confront a reality that once seemed unthinkable. A modern American metropolis could actually run out of water. The rains eventually returned. the lake recovered, and like societies often do after narrowly escaping disaster, Atlanta relaxed. But the underlying vulnerability never disappeared. In fact, it became worse. Metro Atlanta continued growing aggressively after the drought. Millions of additional residents moved into the region. Demand kept climbing while climate projections grew increasingly concerning. By 2050, experts estimate the metro population could expand by nearly 3 million more people. More homes, more industry, more cooling demand during hotter summers, more pressure on the same reservoir. And while that happened, the broader Southeast entered an era scientists describe as hydroclimate volatility, where water systems experience sharper swings between abundance and scarcity. The drought of 2024 reinforced those fears. Unlike traditional droughts that slowly intensify over seasons, this one arrived with shocking speed. Meteorologists classified it as a flash drought, a phenomenon driven by heat and atmospheric conditions that can rapidly drain soil moisture and destabilize reservoirs within weeks. Northern Georgia received only a fraction of its normal rainfall. Lake levels began dropping again. Officials who remembered 2007 watched familiar warning signs return to the monitors. This time, the concern expanded beyond temporary shortages. Climate scientists increasingly argue that what Atlanta once considered rare emergencies may become recurring structural threats. And there is another layer to the story that makes the situation even more fragile. The water itself was politically contested for decades. For 35 years, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida fought one of the most consequential water wars in modern U.S. history. Because Lake Lanier sits near the top of a river system shared across state lines, every gallon consumed by Atlanta affected downstream ecosystems, industries, and communities. Alabama argued that Metro Atlanta was consuming water beyond what federal authorization allowed. Florida accused Georgia of starving the Appalachia River system, contributing to ecological collapse in fisheries and oyster habitats. The legal conflict reached the Supreme Court multiple times. Billions of dollars, state economies, and political reputations became tied to the outcome. Georgia ultimately secured legal rights to continue drawing massive quantities of water from Lake Lanier through long-term agreements finalized in the 2020s. On paper, Atlanta won, but court victories cannot manufacture rainfall. That is the contradiction at the center of Atlanta's future. The city now legally controls water that nature itself may not reliably provide. To Atlanta's credit, leaders have not ignored the threat entirely. Water conservation programs dramatically reduced per capita usage over the last 2 decades. Infrastructure leaks were repaired. Efficiency standards improved. Emergency reserves expanded through projects like the Bellwood Quarry Reservoir, which can now store billions of gallons of backup water near downtown Atlanta. Those investments matter, but they don't fundamentally solve the core problem. Bellwood buys weeks, not survival. Conservation slows the strain but does not erase it, and every new subdivision pushing deeper into the Georgia hills increases demands against a system already approaching its ceiling. Some experts advocate for large-scale wastewater recycling systems capable of treating used water for industrial reuse and irrigation. Others discuss desalination partnerships connected to the Atlantic coast, though the cost would be staggering. Regional planners increasingly acknowledge that Atlanta may eventually require an entirely new philosophy of water management rather than incremental fixes, because the old assumptions are collapsing. The idea that growth can continue indefinitely without restructuring the region's relationship with water is becoming harder to defend every year. Still, on most mornings, Lake Lanier looks perfectly calm. That may be the most deceptive thing about it. Families still launch boats across its surface. Children still swim near docks. Tourists still crowd marinas every summer weekend. The lake projects permanence, stability, safety. But underneath that calm surface sits a submerged landscape of sacrifice and warning. Entire communities drown to create the reservoir. Forests still stand beneath the waterline. Roads lead nowhere under the lakebed. And every time severe drought returns, the lake reveals pieces of that buried world again, as if reminding Georgia that this system was never as secure as people wanted to believe. Atlanta survived the crisis of 2007. It survived the flash drought of 2024. But survival is not the same thing as preparedness. The legal battles may be over. The water rights may be settled. The emergency reservoirs may buy more time than they once did. None of that changes the fundamental equation. Millions of people are depending on a margin of safety while climate pressure intensifies around them. And somewhere beneath the surface of Lake Lanier, the old highway is still waiting. So are the foundations. So is the racetrack. The ghosts disappear when the water rises. The danger does not.